Hey guys, welcome back to another taxonomy video. In this video, we're going to look at annelids and mollusks. We now get to our last phylum of worms, and that is phylum Annelida. Annelids are the most advanced type of worm out of the worm phyla that we've looked at. So a leech and an earthworm are great examples of an annelid. These are triploblastic animals, meaning we have to worry about the coelom, and they're coelomates. This is the first phylum so far that we've looked at that are true coelomates. Because they are coelomates, we now have to consider their blastopore, whether it's a anus or a mouth first, so protostome or a deuterostome. And annelids are protostomes, which means that their mouth forms first from the blastopore. Now they're bilaterally symmetrical and they have cephalization. They have a collection of nervous tissue known as the anterior ganglia. Because annelids are the most advanced phylum of worms, they have a complete one-way digestive tract, meaning food goes from their mouth to the anus. They also have many types of reproductive methods, like being hermaphroditic for sexual reproduction, as well as regeneration through asexual reproduction. And this is the first phylum so far that we've looked at that have a circulatory system. So they have a closed circulatory system, which means their blood is found in vessels and is pumped. So you can see the blood of the annelid in this photo right here. You should also know that annelids are referred to as segmented worms because they have repeated features in their body plan. So they have segments that are repeated, hence the name segmented worm. For their excretory system, they have specialized glands known as metanephridia. Now don't get this confused with protonephridia. Metanephridia are a type of excretory gland with a ciliated funnel opening into the body cavity, and that makes sense because these are coelomates. Another key characteristic of metanephridia is the fact that they work in tandem with blood vessels. So it makes sense that annelids have metanephridia instead of protonephridia because they have a closed circulatory system with blood vessels. Most annelids are covered in chaetae. These are hair-like bristles that aid in traction for movement. If you ever stumble across the words oligochaetes or polychaetes on your DAT, just know that you're dealing with annelids because they have that root word of chaetae. You don't need to know the specifics of what an oligochaete or a polychaete is, just know that they're two commonly mentioned classes of annelids. Okay, we're making good progress. We're on phylum 7 out of 10. We're going to talk about mollusks. This is a big phylum here, so phylum Mollusca. So what is a mollusk, you might ask? Well, it's anything from an octopus to a squid to a slug to even clams. So you have both aquatic and terrestrial animals here. Just like annelids, they are triploblastic and they are coelomates, so they have a true coelom. Because they're coelomates, we now have to consider if they're a protostome or a deuterostome, and they're a protostome, which means that their mouth forms first. Of course, they have bilateral symmetry found in their body plan because they're triploblastic. And let's talk about cephalization real quick. So of course you can picture an octopus or a squid and you can picture their head, right? They have a collection of nervous tissue. Well, think about a clam. Does that have a head? Does that have a collection of nervous tissue where a brain is housed? It doesn't. So cephalization is variable within this phylum. We're going to look at the various classes of mollusks and I'll talk about which ones are cephalized and which ones aren't. Like most of the phyla that we've looked at, you have asexual and sexual reproduction within this phylum. Most, but not all mollusks are sexually dimorphic. They're dioecious. When you have sexual fertilization, you have that externally where they release gametes, but you also have hermaphrodites, for example, that reproduce asexually. So as we've gone through these phyla, they've gotten more complex, right? More advanced. So it makes sense that mollusks have a complete digestive tract. They have a one-way digestive tract with a mouth and an anus. They also use a specialized structure that we're going to look at called the radula for digestion. And just like annelids, they have metanephridia for excretion. Now, metanephridia are also analogous to the Bojanius organ, which is just specialized for mollusks. So you might see either or on your DAT. So just know that metanephridium in mollusks is the same thing as the Bojanius organ. That's it. Okay, moving along, let's talk about the circulatory system. So some mollusks have a closed circulatory system, meaning that the blood is housed within vessels. Other types of mollusks have an open circulatory system. There's no vessels involved. Blood is just flowing throughout their body. On top of this, this is the first phylum so far that we've looked at that have a specialized respiratory system. They have gills that aid in respiration. So let's take a look at the 4 key characteristics of a mollusk. This is found throughout the entire phylum. Number 1 is a foot, number 2 is a visceral mass, 3 is the radula, and 4 is the mantle. So I have a picture of a snail off to the right with these 4 structures highlighted. And the foot, just like how we use our feet, it's used for locomotion. It's used for anchoring, so it's found on the ventral posterior side of the animal. And the visceral mass is all the organs found within inside the mollusk. So it makes sense because viscera is how you refer to someone's organs. I can say your viscera, I'm talking about your organs. So visceral mass is just the collection of all the organs together to make up one central mass. Okay, let's talk about the radula. So the radula is a tongue-like organ that has these bristles, these teeth-like projections on it. That's used to sweep and shred food into the mouth. So it's a specialized organ for mollusk digestion. And then the last key characteristic of a mollusk is going to be the mantle. This is a tissue layer that secretes the hard outer shell. All right, let's talk about cephalopods. Cephalopods are a special type of mollusk. And what does the word pod mean? Well, pod means foot. That's going to be in multiple groups of mollusks that we're going to look at. Ceph means cephalic, comes from the root cephalic, so head, just like cephalization. So head, foot, mollusk, that's an octopus or a squid or a cuttlefish. And these have cephalization, they have a head. So they're really smart, they have a very well developed nervous system, super smart animals. They have a closed circulatory system. This is the only type of mollusk that has a closed system. Every other type of mollusk has an open system. Now let's think about why this is. Well, cephalopods are very mobile. They're highly mobile, which means they have a high demand for oxygen. They need oxygen to their tissues. So that requires a closed circulatory system. Something like a clam or a snail is not that mobile, so it doesn't need that closed circulatory system. So that's why cephalopods are unique. They have cephalization and a closed circulatory system. The next type of mollusk we're going to look at is a gastropod. Gastro meaning stomach and pod again meaning foot. So these are snails and slugs. They have an open circulatory system unlike cephalopods. Because they have an open circulatory system, they have a hemocoel. Now a hemocoel shouldn't be confused with a coelom. The hemocoel is a space where blood can flow through and then bathe the surrounding tissues to provide nutrients and oxygen for the mollusk. Now, just like cephalopods, they have cephalization. What's unique about gastropods, though, is that they have torsion during their larval stage of development. This is the rotation of their internal visceral mass, which brings the anus right above their head. So next time you're in a bad situation, you think you have it bad, it could be worse. You could be a gastropod. Okay, now we get to the last class of mollusk that we need to know, and that's going to be the bivalves. So clams, scallops, oysters, and mussels are key examples here. There's no cephalization, makes sense, and they're suspension feeders, so they only rely on what's in the water, what's suspended in the water for their nutrients. They have a shell that's made up of 2 hinged parts, and each part is known as a valve, hence the name bivalve, because they have 2 of those. Then last thing is their circulatory system, so they have an open circulatory system, so no vessels here, like cephalopods. So just like gastropods, they also have a hemocoel. The hemocoel, again, is the space that blood flows through to bathe the surrounding tissues.